Happy Sunday, beautiful patrons. As always, it is our honor to be with you again. I hope that last week went very well for you and that this week is going to be even better. This coming Thursday night, Bobby C. and I, on our podcast, Hope After Faith, will be discussing the subject, Is Nothing Sacred? And so I would like to base this Sunday's message off of that same question. Is nothing sacred for an atheist or an agnostic or a person whose worldview is more secular, free from religious thought? Is it possible for someone who has graduated from their religion to still hold very dear to their hearts certain ideas, ways of having relationships, or even objects? Is there anything sacred to the non-believer? Now, if we take the time to look up the word sacred in the dictionary, then of course we're very quickly going to discover that the definition usage of the word sacred is of course directly tied back to the idea of God. Something sacred is something that is connected to God. We can go a little further in these definitions, and it becomes obvious that something sacred is something that is venerated, something that is almost to the point of being worshipped, or at least connected to something that is worshipped. But in our everyday usage, if you use that word every day, is that what we mean? Is that what we mean by saying sacred? Or even more particularly for this message and for the upcoming broadcast, when we say is nothing sacred, do we really mean in our hearts and minds to tie that back to divinity or to religion itself? And I think oftentimes we do not. When we ask the question, is nothing sacred? I think, at least in my life and my vernacular, I'm more interested in asking the question, is nothing special? Is nothing held to a higher standard? Is nothing set apart from everything else that is somewhat common or mundane? Is nothing treated specially anymore? And of course, there are many things in our lives that we treat very special. And as secular people, it's obvious that we do not have to have a life or a worldview or objects or relationships or concepts tied back to some belief in divinity in order to feel, and that's the important word here, to feel that things can be special in and of themselves. There are, for a lack of better words, sacred bonds that I believe can be made. This may be between marriage partners. This may be between life partners. This may be family relationship bonds. This may be between very close friends, where that relationship and the obligations to that relationship are actually more valuable than many other things in the lives of the people participating in said relationship. But also, the relationship itself is placed high on the list of priorities. And if there is competition for resources, if there's competition for time, if there's competition for energy, then the things that are listed higher up on the priority list take precedence. that makes them special. That makes certain uses of the word would be appropriate to say that makes it sacred. Now that's just a common way of throwing out that word and using it. I know in particular from having traveled the secular movement for the last 5 years, that we can be very particular about how we use certain words. And thanks to the power of the internet, we can very quickly and very easily call each other on not using words according to their given definitions. But you know me well enough to know that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is having hope after faith. What I'm talking about is understanding that just because we no longer believe in this one concept, this one idea that so much of our culture claims to believe in, and so much of our culture claims to base their priorities off of, that does not mean that our life in any way, under any circumstance, is now limited or lessened. What you and I now know is that in many ways, our lives have actually been made better, because instead of being handed a list of priorities, instead of being force-fed concepts that produce sacredness, instead of being told which items and which relationships and which ideas within our lives should be labeled as sacred, we now have the ability to say, this is special to me. This means something to me. This means something to my life partner. This means something to my children. This means something to my family. This means something to my friends. This, once again, means something to me. There's value in this to me. Shouldn't we be allowing ourselves the time, the space, the energy, the mechanism to really dig deep and figure out what it is that does mean the most to us? What is sacred? Ain't there nothing sacred anymore? Yes. I think each and every one of us is sacred. There may not be any gods, but there are, at least at this moment, around 7 billion people on this planet that are part of an evolutionary process which has brought about, maybe through just nothing more than natural selection or randomness or gene shift or whatever it may be, nevertheless, now Homo sapiens are able to conceive the ideas of gods, the idea of the vastness of space, the idea of being all-powerful, the idea of knowing all knowledge. There may not be gods, but there are creators of gods, and that's us. That sounds pretty special. That sounds like something that could be reverenced and held as sacred. So each one of those lives is created and manipulated and is a manifestation of a mind. There you find an object that should be held as sacred, an object that is obviously very special and deserves to be venerated. That mind then should be given the priority that it rightfully deserves. And when given its proper place in the whole grand scheme of things, that mind should find itself free to determine what it now in turn feels is sacred and valuable and worth spending this very limited time and energy in reverencing. That, my friend, is you. That mind, that God creator, that object, that relic, that beautiful piece of creation that deserves reverence. That is you.